very kind of you. So, thanks for turning up. I know it's the end of the day. It's beautiful weather out there as well. So I do appreciate you turning up. I am using a tool called Mentimeter to run this presentation. I'm not staring at my phone, looking at Twitter or anything like that. It's quite a useful tool. Going to be a little bit of audience participation in it, basically. Let's say a quick word as a thank you to our sponsors. It's been said, and it is true, that without them, we wouldn't be here. So I've gone and spoken to them myself. I didn't think I would actually get much value out of speaking to them, but I went and spoke to them anyway. But still, some of them actually do some stuff that I wasn't aware of that could be quite useful in my day-to-day role. So do go and have a chat with them if you haven't already. My name is Richie Lee, or just Richie. I'm from London, United Kingdom. I work for a company called Red Kite Data Intelligence. I am a senior DevOps engineer. I've been there since February. It's quite good fun. In terms of the PowerShell community, I'm a contributor to DBA tools. I wrote the deployed Databricks functions. I wrote them initially back in 2017. I don't think they've changed too much since then, but if you've ever used it and you've had a broken database deployment, then you know who to blame now. More recently, I've been working as a contributor on azure.databricks.cicd.tools. So that's basically deploying Azure Databricks resources like clusters and jobs and notebooks and all that kind of stuff through PowerShell, and it's stored in JSON, and I've been working on that quite a bit. It's quite popular, it's quite active. Briefly about where I work, it is a good place to work. We're currently hiring. They have a big data company basically, and you'll see through this presentation how I quite like data myself. I used to be a DBA. I've worked as a data engineer, but I've also been interested in the DevOps stuff, and that whole data DevOps thing is quite a challenging thing to get right. And they just have blown up during the pandemic. They sort of grew massively. And I wasn't really looking for a new opportunity, but they convinced me that it was the right move. It's kind of, you want to move for the right reasons, not just because someone's just saying, come join us because it's fun or something like that. So they're trying to push doing things the right way, and it's quite impressive how they've managed to grow, but also keep a good group of people. So if you guys could go to menti.com on your phones, and then there is the code, let me see if I get this right, 3785 37, is that right? Okay, if you go to menti.com, and then, in fact, I don't need to do this because I can pretty much guess that I'm the only English-speaking person in the entire room. As a native language? Yes? Okay, where are you from?
I'm from the Netherlands.
You're not, but it's not, your first language must be Dutch, right? Yeah, so.
I was born in Aruba, so.
Okay then.
That is me.
Oh, fair enough, okay. So, there is a little bit more audience participation here. What I'd like to understand is, so when I submitted this talk, you had to give like a one-liner. And I sort of see that as a learning objectives thing. So I wrote, after attending, you'll understand how fine-grained access to an Azure Data Lake Gen2 works and how to apply those permissions using a PowerShell module with data from source control. So if you could get out your phones and go to menti.com and enter that code, and then answer like how strongly you agree with that with those two statements. Basically, there's like a couple of scales. Basically, results are hidden because I don't want to skew the data at this moment in time. I'll give you a minute or so to do that. Is my moving around all right on the camera? I'm not going too crazy, have I? No, I'm fine. Okay, give it another few more seconds. Okay, so the results are not appearing. And why is that? Good, excellent. Oh, I press H to show results. There we go. Okay. So it looks like everyone has a good idea of how that actually works. Okay. Okay, maybe some more, maybe less. Okay, so How do we do this? So a couple of years ago, I wrote a PowerShell module. It's called adls2.folder.access.tools, because my boss at the time was very keen on very plain English names for modules. But I couldn't resist, and I called it folder access tools so we could shorten it to FAT, just because it's easier to talk about those things and just add a TLA on the name of functions. So basically what happens here, the concept is that you store the permissions in a CSV file. That CSV file is picked up, and then it's run by a service principal. It goes and creates those folders, and then it sets those permissions on those folders. There's different types of permissions. There's default permissions, and then there's access permissions, and I'll come on to that shortly. You can apply those permissions recursively as well. And like that word permissions, it always, like people always say, oh, I don't have permissions, and all this. It's like, what do people actually mean when they say permissions? And really, in Microsoft Azure, there's like, permissions is split in two, okay? So first thing you've got is authentication. So that is basically, an identity is who they say they are. So in Azure Active Directory, you have users, you have service principals, you have passwords, you have keys. That is authenticating with Azure Active Directory saying, I am who I say I am, please let me in. So Azure Active Directory is the trusted identity store for accessing the resources in Azure. The other side of that is authorization. So you've all got your key card for the hotel. So your key card authorizes you to access a certain amount of rooms in the hotel. And then that authenticates that you are who you are, and then that authorizes you what rooms you can access, right? So there's 4 ways that you can access a storage account in Azure, and I'm going to cover the first 2 tomorrow in my talk, bright and early at 9 a.m. The other 2 are role-based access control, so Azure RBAC, and the other one is access control lists, ACLs for short. So these 2, so the first one, RBAC, is basically you get coarse-grained access control. And what I mean by that is you're added to one of these RBAC roles on the storage account, and then you have that permission for any of the containers that are within that storage account. So you've got the 3 there, so you've got the data owner, data contributor, and data readers. Data owner can do anything basically and assign permissions to other people on the lake. Data contributor can do a lot, but they can't assign permissions. And then you've got the data reader, which basically means they can only read the data, believe it or not. That's exactly what it means. And it's coarse-grained because you can't finely tune it anymore. You're in that group, you've got access to everything, okay? If it's read, it's there, etc., etc. And it's different from if you've used other RBAC roles in Azure. It's different because it's like you have the owner and the contributor on other resources, and they still exist on the storage account, but they're only to do with administering the storage account itself in Azure. It's got nothing to do with the data. So it's split. This is all about the data and not about actually administering the storage account in Azure. The second one, access control list, is that finer grained access. So you'll have a group of folders, and then the permissions are set on the actual folder itself. Those permissions are inherited, or they can be inherited depending which ones you set. So there's like default permissions, and then there's access permissions, and you set them on the actual the folders themselves. And then you can apply those permissions recursively after they've been created if you really need to. So RBAC is the primary way that things are authorized. So this is the authorization process on the data lake. So the first you do an operation like you want to do a read or a write or a delete. The process is it goes and checks to see if you're a member of that RBAC role. So if you are a member of that RBAC role, great, you can go and do what it is you want to do. If you're not a member of that RBAC role that has that operation, then it goes and checks the ACLs on the actual folder itself. So if you want to delete a certain file in a folder, if you're not in the RBAC group, but you do exist as an identity on the ACL, then you can go and do what it is that you need to do. And you can mix and match RBAC and ACL permissions. So I'm not going to go through this line by line because it's just too much. But looking at this and just reading it quickly, I quickly came to the conclusion that if you're going to use ACLs, why bother using RBAC? Because you're going to have to set the ACLs one way, and then you're going to have to set the RBAC permissions the other way, and it's all just going to be quite confusing. And the idea here is you want to be able to store the ACLs as code, and then you want the service principal to go and create those folders and set those ACL permissions on the actual folders themselves. And it's important to note that who creates the folder is the owner of that folder. So and the owner of the folder determines who can set the permissions. So if you're running a Databricks process or you're running an ADF and you've got a bunch of folders created, and the ADF is being run by a managed identity, for example, and it's going and creating those folders, it's that managed identity that has to access the permissions. So if you want to change the owner on a folder, it's really difficult to do. It's very hard to do. So if you actually want to, the kind of like best practice is set up the folder structure that you want to manage the permissions on, and then those data loading processes, is they're going to put the data in things, that's going to be after the fact. So there's a little bit of preparation going on there. And when I'm talking about setting up the folder structure, depending on what type of data lake you're using, determines how much control that you have on the on sort of, you know, managing the permissions. And this sounds sort of a bit obvious, but basically there's a really good document available on GitHub called the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Data Lake, written by a storage account architect from Microsoft. It's been updated a few times. It's like this excellent resource on like the best practices for setting up a data lake and considerations for permissions and how you want to organize your data. And thinking about, you know, there's like, you know, geographic requirements. So for example, you know, there's that EU thing, isn't there? What's it called? GDPR, and then there's a California ruling as well. So data that comes from California, and then data only in Russia should only ever be stored in Russia. So then that becomes another interesting problem. They talk in great depth about how to organize the data lakes, basically. All links, there's going to be one link at the end that's going to send you to the bunch of links. So if you want to make a note of that link at the end, then you can pick up all the stuff. Well, so what I mean by how the data is organized is you've basically got a centralized data lake or a federated data lake. And centralized data lake is one massive data lake, one storage account, the containers underneath, and then that's going to be managed by a central team. So that central team is going to dictate how it is that things are going to be organized, how it's going to be structured, how permissions are going to be set. The alternative is a federated data lake, which is essentially people have their own data lakes, but then there's a central team that will offer guidance on best practice. And in terms of that centralized data lake, it can still kind of be a federated data lake if you give people a certain part of that, of the folder structure. And so you're managing that. You're managing the access on that. You're managing the data there. You're managing like how you want to have your folders. So you generally have like raw, cleansed, and output in terms of when you're doing an ETL process. So, you know, it can get quite involved, but the important thing to note there is the fact that, you know, you're going to go for one of those two options, and what you don't want to end up is a worst of both worlds, where you end up with a centralized data lake and a team that don't really know how the people want to use the data lake, and then they're unable to offer that guidance and best practice. And unfortunately, I've been at a place like that where the central team weren't that helpful in helping us figure out what it is that we actually wanted to do. One of the best practices that's on that document is always use security groups when you're adding things to ACLs. And that's because it's a lot easier to add and remove users to a security group in Active Directory than it is to go and update the ACLs. So now, why are we using code, source control to store ACLs? And for me, the main reason is the fact that you've got an auditing process. So all the permissions are stored in CSV files. So CSV files are quite easy to read. If you're going to go and add and remove permissions to the CSV, then you can see what's being added, what's being removed. If you're using something like Git, you can control the master branch or the main branch, and then you can create pull requests and update the ACLs, and then create a pull request to, you know, what the permissions are now going to look like. You can add branch policies, that, set amount of people have got to approve this change. So, the data owners or the data custodians, they can have access via Azure DevOps to see what changes are being made. You can raise a work item if you want that has to be approved by someone so that you know who, what, when and why authorised the access to the lake. And that kind of information is really useful when people want to say who has access to the data lake and how do you know these people have access and how are you controlling access to the data lake. So the nice thing about the CSV is that it's flattened. Then you can go and unflatten that in PowerShell using a custom object. I'll show you that bit in a second. But the fact that you can just view the history and see what's being added and what's being removed using a CSV and Git is really, really quite straightforward. So I think we might skip this part because I feel that there's quite a strong understanding from the first time I asked this question. We'll come to ask it again. I'm not actually finished. That's not the end of the session, don't worry. I don't really like demos. I know at PowerShell Conference they like demos. I don't like demos. They don't do my anxiety any good. They tend to go wrong. You can spend ages writing demos and they still end up going wrong. And you end up not focusing on the content of your presentation, and you end up just focusing on your demos all the time. And people get lost in demos as well. So what I thought I'd do by way of a compromise is just run a few of the just run the pester tests basically that I wrote for the module. So we can take a look at those. That looks okay. So the CSV has got the 8 columns. Container, folder, AD group ID should be quite straightforward. So container is the name of the container on the storage account that the folder exists on. The folder is the name of the folder. The AD group is the AD group in Azure Active Directory. And then the AD group ID is the corresponding, I think it's application ID of the AD group in Azure Active Directory. So you don't have to include that GUID. You can leave that blank, and if it is blank, then there is a function, I think it's a private function, that will go and get the AD group ID from the name. So here I use a caching thing because sometimes you'll come across the same group several times over, and so rather than have to make these constant calls to AD, I just thought, right, well, I'll just create a global variable, and if it doesn't exist in that global variable, then I'll just make that call. So it speeds up the process a little bit by doing it like that. The disadvantage of not including the ID, well, the advantage of not including the ID is the fact that if you ever change tenant, or if you've got multiple tenants in your organization and you use the same names across those tenants, then you don't need to go and update the GUID. So you'll have separate GUIDs across tenants. The disadvantage is the fact that you need global.read.directory.all, I think it is, as a permission in Azure Active Directory. That's quite a powerful permission, and some people aren't really happy about handing that out. I mean, it's just read. There's nothing you can really do with it other than just, read group details, which is all you really want to do. But if you've got that permission, then great. Don't include the GUIDs, and the process is more transferable across tenants. And then these next three columns are default permission, access permission, and recurse permission. These are important. So on the ACLs, access control list, there's 2 types of permission. There's a default permission and there's an access permission. So an access permission is, I've got this folder here. This folder is going to have these permissions and these permissions only, and they're not going to be inherited by anything underneath. That is an access permission. Then you have this default permission. Don't know why it's called default, but that is what it is. Default permission is anything that's created underneath this folder after this default permission has been created is going to inherit that permission. So that's useful when you're managing permissions, insofar as the fact that there's only so many folders you have to go down before you go, okay, now I can just let the default permissions propagate through the rest of the data lake. So I don't need to manage every single folder. I just need to manage to a certain level. The disadvantage with default permissions is the fact that they are only added to files and folders when and after that default permission has been created. So if you've got a bunch of folders and then you update that default permission, those folders that already exist won't inherit those permissions. They won't see the changes. And that is the design of how this whole process has been set up. There's some links at the end that talk, I mean, I've reread this whole ACLs thing several times over because I wanted to keep it in my head, but it's based on an old way of managing permissions on folders. And, it's fine, it is what it is, but that's why that recurse exists, basically. So if you want to apply those permissions recursively to all those files and folders underneath, then you can. The trouble is it takes a long time for that to run. So the idea there is try and set your default permissions up before you go and add loads of data to the data lake, and then you won't run into that recursive issue occurring. Or if you can, just add groups to the security groups that already exist, if you can. There's ways around it. By default, I always have it switched off because it will just go and run through all the folders and it'll go, no, they don't need it. And it's just a long time to run. So that's how you manage the 3 permissions there. And then I've got the pester test here. So it's quite a straightforward pester test. One thing I decided to do with the tests was not do any mocking. And there was a good talk yesterday morning about mocking. And mocking in pester is great. But the thing is that because I was using an Azure data lake and because I was using Azure Active Directory, basically all the tests would just be mocking. And I just felt there was such little value in writing tests that just mocked everything. And I would want to run it against the data lake anyway and use Azure Active Directory. I thought, right, I'll just cut to the chase. I'll just do it right now on these tests. And then there's like a config setup of like the data lake and the storage account and a couple of groups that are created in Azure Active Directory, so I know their values. And this is created as part of the Azure YAML pipeline. These values here are going fed into it. So the tests here, the first 2 tests are pretty straightforward. So I'm just running that get CSV as array, should not throw, get CSV as array, should not throw. Quite straightforward. And then what I want to do, as I was speaking about this earlier, is take that flat CSV and turn it into the custom object that's organized by folder that's got all the different groups underneath it. Because I don't want to do it, because it would take an awful long time to go. I could go through the CSV one folder at a time if I wanted to, or one entry at a time. But then I would probably be hitting the same folder 4, 5, 6 times. And ACLs is like, it's obviously, it is in the name, it's a list. So rather than take each individual access entry and go, does this exist? Yes, it does. Okay, do nothing. Does it exist? No, it doesn't. Okay, let's go and add it and update the ACL on the folder, is to create a custom object that looks like the ACLs that I want, and then get the ACL that's on the folder, compare the two and go, right, I need to go and add these, and then go and update it. So it's a little bit faster, because it does take a while to run, but it's faster this way than if you just did it line by line. So to put simply, I'm getting the CSV and then where object. So sometimes I want to run recurse or not recurse, basically. And then I'm grouping it by container, folder, whether it's recursive. And then I'm creating a custom object at the end here that is grouped by the container and the folder, whether it's recursive, and then all the items at the end there. So this test here, what I'm doing here at the bottom is that I am getting that CSV and getting the result, and I'm making sure that the first result, that the items should be exactly 2. And what I mean by that is it's basically these 2 entries here. So then I've grouped it by folder. So that makes sense. I can confirm it's the same folder because I'm saying the folder in the first items is exactly the same as in the second one, but then the AD groups are separate here. So I've got here a way of actually making sure that the custom object that I want is structured in the way that I want it. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to run this test. I don't know, it did actually run. So that one ran really quickly, and that's because it's just creating that CSV that we saw here and then just munging it through sorry, not munging. I'll try not to use slang. And then it's just processing it through that function basically and making sure it works as expected. The other big function is the thing that goes and sets the ACL entry on the item. And this is this function here. And again, I'm not going to go through it line by line because we will be here a very long time. But essentially, it takes that custom object and then compares it against the folder or it gets the ACL on the folder and compares it and makes sure that it does actually match And if it doesn't match, then it will go and update the ACL on the folder with the permissions that need to be added. So this is a private function, so it's not accessible to people outside. There's like a public function that I created. And so there's not too many tests around this set ACL entry on item, but it's this set for ADLS access. This is basically this is like the public interface basically. So there is a what if on it as well. So you can check to see those permissions that are being created. So you could run that as part of the pull request if you really wanted to. And there's also a process of removing ACLs as well, which I'll come on to in a little bit. So this basically sets up what it is that you want to do and then goes and executes the private function. So this was the one where I decided to write a load of tests around it because as a former DBA, I do not like changes to data where it's difficult to roll back. So I wrote an awful lot of tests around that one. As like an awful lot. I'm not going to go through them line by line, but if you want to just go and get an understanding of the type of test that I ran, this is the kind of thing that's happening, using the what if to make sure that nothing actually goes and changes. And so if I run these tests, it should take about 5 minutes to run these tests, I think. So this is going to run the whole suite of tests that I've got available. So I'm big on tests. Pester's a great thing. If you've ever used Pester, you know how good it is. If you've never used Pester, then I highly recommend you to use it because it is a really great thing. And it's tests that really give you the confidence that something does actually work. And so on the Azure DevOps YAML pipeline, we always run the tests. We've got pretty good test coverage on this module. The things that aren't covered, I think, are using global IDs or something, or global catch something. It's using something crazy that just makes it really difficult to test using Pester. But the main functions are really thoroughly tested, and that was the thing that really was really important to me. And then we've got the 4 tests. It takes about 5 minutes to run on a DevOps agent. Yeah, it's 40 tests, sorry, but I've written another one now, so we've got 41 tests on there. So it's quite a well-tested module. And I think the last thing that I wanted to talk about is there's always like this concept of managing the ACLs. It's like, well, adding them is fine, but what about removing them? And removing things from something is very risky if it's not easy to put it back. And if I refer you back to the centralized or federated data lake, I mentioned the fact that you could have like a subset of folders that you're managing on a centralized data lake. And if you think about the default permissions, then you can't be sure that there's any default permissions that are being propagated down onto those folders that you're managing. So there's something on the root folder or a sub-root folder or something higher up. You don't know, someone's managing the access onto those. And so when you've got this CSV, you only have as complete a list as you're aware of. And on the ACL on the folder itself, there may be permissions that do need to exist, but they're just not in your CV. So, you could add them to your CV, but then if someone goes and removes it, then you're going to be adding something after the fact, and it's just confusing. So when it comes to removing permissions, unless you're really confident that what you've got in that CSV is everything that needs to be on those folders, don't remove that. Don't use that remove ACLs thing. Never remove the ACL on a folder. It's just, it could just cause a world of pain. So then you have the question of, well, how do you actually remove a permission that you don't want to manage anymore? And when we saw those permissions, the default and the access permissions, you've got the three entries, right? It's like the R, the W, and the X. Yeah, read, write, execute. We go back to the CSV there. You can see like an example there. So that permission there is saying you've got read and you've got execute, but you haven't got write. Excellent. Good. It was still working on my machine, believe it or not. So you've got read but not write, but execute on this specific folder here as a default permission. So how do you remove that permission? What you can do in the CSV, and it is in the tests, is if you just set the permissions to dash, 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 and then push it through the function, when you go and compare in the CSV against what's on the in the ACLs on that folder, Azure will figure out, okay, so this thing doesn't have any permissions, I'll just remove it off the ACL. So that's a neat process of being able to remove the permissions that you've got in the CSV without having to go and press that remove ACLs and hope that everything works fine. So quite a neat and tidy operation there. That was quite nice to find that was there. It made things an awful lot easier. So yeah, so all the tests have run, they've all passed. No issues with the module. I do want to talk one more thing. I've got a little bit of time. Does anyone know what bypass traverse checking is? No? Okay. So this is a security policy in Windows Server, okay? It's probably on all versions of Windows, but I know it's on Windows Server. So bypass traverse checking is, if I need access to a folder that's like 15 folders down, so say I know it from a problem I had, reporting services, SQL Server reporting services. The server's account was running reporting services, so it needed permissions to access this folder, to access the exe in order to run it so that reporting services would start, okay? This server's account was a non-admin account on the machine. I could not get it to start reporting services. It had all the permissions it needed, but I could get an admin to go and, I could run reporting services with an admin account. I had no idea what was going on. After about 4 days, I figured out there's a security policy in Windows called bypass traverse checking. What that does is that skips. So if you haven't got permissions to see program data, blah, 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 all those folders, it only matters if you've got access to that folder down there. So when you go and install reporting services, it gives the service account permissions on that folder specifically. It doesn't give permissions on anything else. So Windows is not checking those folders, it just checks that folder at the end. So the whole point of that is it's more secure. Your service account's only got access to that, right? For some reason, the sysadmin I was working with decided that bypass traverse checking as a security policy was bad and should be switched off and should be controlled centrally through, I forget how it was that they managed it. But then you couldn't go and alter it. So eventually no one recommended that you go and manage it this way, but he decided. And to this day, I still don't understand why he did it. But this is important in Data Lake, that concept of you don't have to check the permissions. You just have to check that root, that folder that you're accessing doesn't apply. If you want access to a folder that's 15 folders below those, you need access to all those root folders. So you need to have read and execute on all those folders if you want to have like read and execute on that base one. Is that kind of making sense? It's kind of like, so you see, like, that's why they've got this execute permission. So this execute permission gives you permissions to execute accessing that folder, and it gives you permission to read that folder. But then obviously there's a branch, so you want that default permission to only go down to that level. So you need to manage the groups. So it's not straightforward. It's not straightforward at all, ACLs. It's not straightforward. It's not simple. And this is why people tend to go for that. I just want it to work and just use RBAC, or just don't even know that this kind of thing exists. And they just go and make their permissions on their data lake really quite messy. So do go and read around the subject. I have got links. The ACL stuff is, it's dry. I'll be honest with you. It's not an exciting read, but it's really important. So, so this is the penultimate slide. So if you could just answer whether you feel that you've sort of now at the end of my talk that you understand what fine-grained permissions are and how to apply them through the Menti, and I can just view what it was at the beginning, at the end of the presentation, and show the results at the end so people don't skew the data. So I'll leave this up so people can fill in. That is the end. Does anyone have any questions? No? If no one's got any questions, I will do bonus content because I lied when I said that there's 4 ways of accessing the storage account. You get the storage access key, the SAS token, RBAC, and ACLs. The fifth one is brand new. It's called, oh my goodness, they called it ABAC, Account-Based Access Control. So it's basically a combination of RBAC and ACLs, where it's a little bit more finely grained or finely tuned, because ACLs are hard. ACLs, if you go and manage your stuff for 5 minutes, you'll realize just how hard it is. It's really difficult, and there's no out-of-the-box solution which Microsoft have provided, and I'm ambivalent about whether they need to do that kind of thing or not, but I don't think there's enough awareness around managing this stuff properly, because it can cause a world of pain. And when you're talking about data, if data leaks, it can be very expensive for businesses. So ABAC is basically a combination of having it less fiddly and less complicated, and it's still being kind of roles based on the actual Azure resource itself. I've not used it myself. I only found out about it last week. A colleague of mine told me about it, and I don't know how long it's actually been around. I still think it's only in preview, so it's nice that there's a less complicated way of having to deal with permissions, but it's annoying that I've got an awful lot of information invested in ACLs. But if there are no more questions, obviously I will be around for a little bit. Look at that, and I think we've gone from a 4.5 average to 4.7, so that's excellent. So if anyone has not got any more questions, I will just end it there. Thank you for your time.